Hello, everyone. Dr. Chellam, and of course, Marina is here now. She's all back from Iceland.
I'm back.
And how was it?
Oh, it was great, and it was always bright, and there's lots of mountains to climb, and
How many hours of daylight did you have?
it's 24 hours. It doesn't even come close to setting.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So 2 a.m. yet there's no difference between 2 a.m., 2 p.m.
Did you get to sleep?
A couple hours. They don't really have blackout curtains like I expected, so it was a little tough. We made it.
Even their blinds would not cut out the sun.
No, it was like taking a nap.
Wow.
But when you have 24 hours of sunlight, you don't need to sleep.
That's true. Well, welcome to our fourth podcast. And today I actually had put out into the community as to what do you guys want to hear about. And one of our very frequent listeners requested that we talk about menopause. And I think a good amount of our listeners are women who are in that phase in their early 50s, mid-50s. So I thought it was a very good topic to talk about. And we're going to obviously go into, is menopause always a painful condition? Or is this something that's natural? Why do some people experience so many symptoms and why others just find it a breeze? So before I get into that, remember Holistic and Integrative Center of Novi is the best place for you to find your best doctor, and that is always you. And why do we say that? Because the best patient for us is an empowered patient, a well-educated patient. And that's what we try to really achieve through these podcasts, is to give you enough knowledge that you are able to take the steps to get yourself better. And when you think of, who do I go to for advice, I'm hoping Holistic and Integrative Center of Novi will be high on your mind, because that's what we like to do, is empower people and make them equal partners in their health journey. So let's get into what menopause really means. So physiologically, if you look at what menopause is, it's exactly that. It's a pausing of the menstrual cycle. It's defined as the last time you ever had your last period. And a lot of times women will know that they had their last period, or they may forget. They'll say, it's been months. I don't know when I last had a period. There are two categories of women. Other women have a lot of what we call, now we term it perimenopausal, which is where they have these irregular periods. They go heavy bleeding, long bleeding. Then there's months together they don't have periods, when they're really thankful that they don't have the periods. Then they have mood swings, mood changes. We call it vasomotor reactions. That's like they feel hot and cold. And you've heard of the night sweats. A lot of people talk to us about the sweats.
Yep, that's common.
Yeah. Now, when you define a sweat, a menopausal sweat, it'll almost be like they're sitting there, they're talking to somebody, and you can actually see them drenched in sweat, almost instantaneously. At other times, it's in the middle of the night where they have to turn, get up, change their clothes, change their covers. So it's kind of a very, can be initially very annoying. After some time, it's just it disrupts your life. So why do people experience this? We're going to get into that. And should you be even experiencing this? Is this a normal menopause, or are there different degrees of menopausal symptoms that we should be familiar with? So the way I look at it, I would say there are two big groups of women. One group is they struggle all through the menopausal period, if you want to call it as when I said menopause is the day you stopped your last menstrual period, that should be just one day or 1 month. But we make it like months together, or even sometimes a couple of years. People have hot flashes for years together. And we're going to discuss how abnormal is it? Does it really need intervention? What should you be doing? What can you do? Is there something natural you can do, or is there something that you should be doing very early in your life? So let's begin by understanding the menstrual cycle. So the purpose of the menstrual cycle, nature is actually very fascinating. Women have the regular menstrual cycle between what they call the reproductive years. So basically to ripen the egg, and if it gets fertilized, then of course you have the offspring, and then the uterine wall sheds, and again the cycle repeats, and it repeats so many times in her lifetime as long as she's producing eggs. Now, as you get older, some people, first of all, when you look at menarche, which is the time you get the very first period, so it may happen at the age of 11. Frighteningly, it's happening at the age of 7 these days. Right, and there's a reason why that's happening too.
I'm sure we'll address that eventually.
Yes. At some point we will talk about but actually when you think back, women who have those menopausal symptoms, now that we've made it like a period of time instead of just one particular event, stopping of the menstrual cycle, one of the things that we notice is if you start having trouble with your periods very early in life, like your menstrual cycles are irregular as a young adolescent, lots of pain, lots of bleeding, particularly if you've had endometriosis or infertility issues, that's the time you're going to have to start taking notice, because eventually when it comes to the menopausal symptoms, it's an imbalance between the estrogen and progesterone. So most people understand what estrogen is. It's a female hormone, so is the progesterone. They come in different times of the female cycle. You have the estrogen maturing the follicle, the progesterone, eventually the follicle gets formed, and then there's a withdrawal of estrogen, and then you have your periods. However, what happens in menopause, a few things can happen. You may still be producing the estrogen and progesterone. If not from the ovaries, it is picked up by the adrenals. And when you have enough of the estrogen progesterone, your body, for some reason, when you get into the menopausal state, stops recognizing the estrogen. So even though you have estrogen, you have symptoms of a low estrogen state. And a low estrogen state, I can go over a few things that we
that would be where your blood work looks normal, but your body's not responding to estrogen.
You have symptoms. Yeah, you have symptoms of low estrogen. So if I actually measure the levels, they look fine. Yep. But there's another hormone that we actually check to see if the body is resistant to the estrogen. It's called the follicular stimulating hormone, FSH. That gets really high. Normally it would be lower because it's stimulating. Now the estrogen has come up and it should be fine. But if it still continues to be high, then FSH is resisting. It's like not listening to the estrogen that's present. Mm-hmm. So these are the women who will struggle with low libido, starting very in the perimenopausal or menopausal years. They also would have the dryness. They would have the irregular uterine bleeding on and off. Sometimes they can bleed for days together. But I think a long-term impact of low estrogen, which is what they've tried to look for, is memory problems, Alzheimer's. It can be associated with that. So it's extremely important to understand if you have a low estrogen, if your body's resisting the estrogen. Then there are other reasons why that happens is because of pesticides. Our exposure to pesticides, we're like almost 80,000 new chemicals every year. Yeah, I mean,
every year.
Yeah, and you'll find that it has increased in the last 2 decades. It's almost like you would say, why does our body need to detox? Why do we need to do anything? Doesn't the body know how to take care of itself? It does, but these are new things. The body has to develop new mechanisms to actually take care of these unique chemicals. Sometimes they disrupt our hormonal cycle. And women tend to suffer more. If you see, autoimmunity is greater in women. The aging process is much faster in women because losing weight is more difficult in women. And we have men and women doing the same program in our practice, and you'll find the men shed weight like crazy because that testosterone somehow helps them. And our estrogen and progesterone really is very disruptive. So
have the babies, and we suffer for that.
I know, but you know that also
Came
makes
up
us
with a
strong,
system.
right? But we're also stronger, so it's very important to understand how your body can get disrupted. So let's look at the things that actually disrupt your estrogen or make it low. Pesticides. We have, if you've suffered from infertility, if you struggle to get your first baby, you probably need to be a little more careful. Prepare for menopause very early. Like you need to get, and I'll tell you what are the things you can do to make sure that you don't have such a big hormonal imbalance at the time of menopause. The other one is, of course, our most favorite, which we all get affected by. And the only time you don't get affected is when you're 6 foot under. Do you know what that is?
No.
Stress. Stress, 24/7 stress, right? Even some people tell me, oh, maybe we won't be stressed when you're sleeping. People cannot sleep because they have stress. When there's a chronic elevation of cortisol, this is a disruption of the female hormones. So that's another one to keep in mind. And then, of course, our nutrition deficiencies, the nutrient deficiencies. We know that a lot of the enzymes and hormones require cofactors or co-pilots. So for every plane to fly, you have a pilot and a co-pilot. Now, the co-pilot is as important. They kind of make sure the reaction takes place in the right intensity, in the right direction to produce the right thing. So deficiency of zinc is very common. And then you have vitamin D deficiency, which a lot of us, we think it's because of lack of sunlight. But we have people who come from Florida, from Texas, who have low vitamin D. A lot of it is got to do with your gut health. That, again, is a completely a different podcast. But the gut becomes very important. So, round and round, I'm going to come back to what you're eating, right, eventually. So besides that being an issue, we also have, there was something else I wanted to bring. I know it slips my mind, but things that we do like cigarette smoking or exposure to cigarette smoke can also create a low estrogen state. But besides the low estrogen state, we can also have a high estrogen state. And a high estrogen state is, technically speaking, during menopause, we shouldn't have a high estrogen state. And that's when you have all these symptoms, and the symptoms are basically the weight gain as you get older, headaches and anxiety. When people come in with a lot of anxiety, they get put on antidepressant, anti-anxiety medications because they've been shown to improve menstrual symptoms, but it's actually a elevation of estrogen. The other thing they do is because they see the estrogen being so high, they try to balance it out by giving progesterone. Mm-hmm. And what I would say is if your symptoms are terrible, go ahead and get the progesterone, but then go down and work on the root causes of why you have an elevated estrogen. Does that make sense?
Elevated estrogen, that's not normal.
It is not normal in a menopausal, yes.
In menopause, it's supposed to go down.
Yes.
Okay.
And they have to balance each other out, but then when you have an imbalance in how elevated the estrogen is, you have a lot of symptoms. So that's where the weight gain comes, the anxiety comes, fibrocystic breast disease, fibroids. You just have a whole bunch of issues that are associated with a higher estrogen, and of course breast cancers. Cannot eliminate that. We see that all the time. Now, how does estrogen get high in menopause when the ovaries are failing?
I was going to ask.
Yeah. So one of the things that happens is we have an excess of fat. So the fat cells actually have this enzyme called aromatase, which will make more and more estrogen. Now, the next question you'll always ask is, so how do you get fat cells? Or why do you get fat cells if it's not just the loss of hormones? You guys ready? It's always my most favorite hormone, insulin resistance. So women who've had insulin resistance for years, where you've had this belly fat, you've had the high and low blood sugars, you think you have insulin resistance, you cannot wake up in the morning and go for a couple of hours without food, like you got to eat every 2 hours, otherwise you'll have the shakes. Those are all signs of insulin resistance. So it starts very young. You may be 18, 19, and you walk around eating candy and juice, never gain weight. That's the first early signs of insulin resistance. And then later on, you start gaining weight, and then you're constantly fighting to lose the weight. And then you go on to the starvation or high exercise mode, you disrupt your progesterone and estrogen throughout your reproductive years. And then you have the interruptions with pregnancy. Sometimes this pregnancy is stimulated by in vitro fertilization and hormones. Sometimes it may happen after, whether it be supplements or change in diet. So there's a lot of disruption to our hormones. But insulin resistance brings about this accumulation of the fat in the abdominal area. Those fat cells will create aromatase, which will create a higher estrogen content. So what happens is when you have those symptoms, the hot flashes, the loss of libido, the dryness, which can be low estrogen, and then the high estrogen is the high anxiety, the fibrocystic breast disease. Most of the times we try to give people progesterone, the symptoms get under control, but if every time you take down the hormone replacement therapy, your symptoms return. So when do you actually get, I've had people in their 80s who will not get off their hormone replacement or therapy because they've never addressed their underlying insulin resistance or their metabolic problems, and therefore they always have menopausal symptoms. Does it make sense?
Even into their 80s or something.
Into their 80s. If they go off the hormone replacement, and they do tell me that they look younger, they feel a lot better, but it's almost like sustaining life on life, life support. You're almost, by the time you're in your 80s, I think we think it's normal to be on 6 to 8 medications, and everything is sustaining different parts of the body or different functions of the body. And I just want, we truly believe that's not true. And there are different ways of attaining health and not having all these symptoms. So women, there are the other group of women I said, right? They don't even remember when they had their last periods. They don't have the hot flashes. They don't have any of the symptoms. They don't seem to need the antidepressants or hormone replacement. What is different about them? They probably, number one, have a good genetic protoplasm, like their protoplasm is good. They have the cytochrome enzyme, probably metabolizes the estrogens appropriately through the liver. And the other one is they probably took care of themselves. They probably ate well, exercised, and were focused on their health right from their 30s. You'll find a lot of times women who actually pay attention to their health have very rarely the menopausal symptoms. So our goal should be, how do we, first of all, identify when you have menopausal symptoms? Remember, if you are actually exercising and eating healthy, you got to ask yourself, when did you start doing that? Not when you turned 50, but if you did it when you turned 30, we have to really look at the reason. But most people begin to take care of their health into their 50s. Do you know the reason why?
They get out of the house.
Absolutely. They stop taking care of other people and they're willing to focus on themselves. So when you start taking care of yourself, suddenly, I always make fun of the guys who join our program. They'll eat 2 kale salads maybe in 2 weeks, and they want to see results immediately because suddenly they feel they're eating healthy. The same thing with women. They start exercising, they go 1 week to the gym, and they don't understand why their hot flashes haven't gone. Remember, you earned those hot flashes over 35 years of not taking care of yourself. So to actually have it go away, it's going to take you a few months of very focused effort to get to that point. And a lot has to change. And you really have to, it's not remember I always talk about internal and external stresses. Our internal stresses are what we put in. External stresses are how we react to the world outside us. So both have to change. So the cortisol changes, our estrogen and progesterone changes, our liver functions change. Because what happens when you have a fatty liver? Your estrogen metabolism is again inhibited. Mm-hmm. Particularly if you have a mutation. Mutation means a change in the enzyme, the power of the enzyme. How well can it do the job? It can be at 150% or maybe at 30%. If the power of these enzymes that break down your hormones and get rid of the excess estrogen, if that's not working at its optimal, you're going to land up having a high estrogen state. The other thing also you have to remember is as they're getting broken down, if you remember the detox video that I created, as they get broken down, you get metabolites. That means intermediate product. So there's an initial product, there's a middle product, and there's a final product before it gets eliminated. That middle product is more dangerous than the original estrogen because how they are sliced and diced, it actually can be more dangerous and can cause a higher incidence of breast cancer. So there's so much that goes into the function of menopause. The only way to overcome menopausal symptoms is number one, you could take your hormone replacement initially. We really recommend bioidentical hormones, so they're not synthetic hormones. They do impact your health and wellness. And then address the root cause. Is your liver fatty? Is your gut inflamed? Do you have too many stressors? Do you have deficiency of certain nutrients, particularly zinc, the B complexes, and vitamin D and vitamin C? And then look at what are your exposures? What are the toxins you are surrounded by? Are you obsessed with cleaning? Cleaning your counters, cleaning everything. Could there be something disrupting? Are you using a lot of plastic stuff? The BPA can be very disruptive. So
don't eat anything in plastic.
Even if it's microwavable.
Yes.
Yes. And then I also want to address, there's something called the cadmium. Cadmium is another one that they've been really found to induce the growth of breast cancer cell lines, increase the estrogen, and the same things that increase estrogen reduce progesterone. The only other reason why progesterone would be low, therefore there's an imbalance, the estrogen looks higher, is when you over-exercise. Like women turn 50, kids are out of the house and like they want to lose weight. And they go into this exercise mode, sign up with a trainer, and that can be quite a challenge and that can also be very disruptive. So let's go through the processes how you will address the menopausal symptoms. Number one, we're going to have to address insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is really about diet, whole foods, really avoiding refined sugars. And remember, discipline is freedom. Discipline is not restriction. We completely forget and we think if I have to be disciplined, that means I'm losing my freedom. Actually, you have the freedom to live your life the way you want if you're disease-free. So discipline to understand what will help you and what will hurt you is extremely important. Reducing insulin resistance. Number two will be to make sure you handle your stressors. Do you get anxious? Are you seeing the negative in everything that you come across? I mean, are you constantly worrying about stuff? If you're worrying about stuff, really the big thing you have to do is write down what you're worrying about and what it makes you, how bad it makes you feel, and make it so miserable that it's not worth living your life that way. And create another statement which tells you, instead of worrying, I could do this, or I could do this, or I could do this. Give yourself choices. So this is something, one of the coaching programs I'm in, I thought this was very phenomenal. You ask yourself this question. Let's say you have, I'm fat, I can't lose weight. If you say that, that's a statement, right? What does the brain get? Oh, yes, I'm fat, I can't lose weight. Good. We're done, right? The conversation is done. Whereas if you say, I'm fat, I can't lose weight, why is that I can't lose weight? Ask yourself a question. And then that question will give you another answer, which will be, is it true that you cannot lose weight? No, maybe I could. So what could you be doing to lose weight? I could potentially exercise. So why is that you're not exercising? I'm too lazy. Is it true you're lazy? No, it's just I don't have the time. Is it true that you don't have the time? You keep asking yourself the question till you come to the answer, no, I can actually find some time to exercise. And everybody can. Because I know when people get diagnosed with cancer, they do find the time to go get radiation therapy and they do find the time to get chemotherapy. So you can find the time to exercise. You just have to ask yourself the right question and stop making statements to yourself. So insulin resistance, you're going to address. Number two, you're going to check the vitamin levels, A, B, C, E, and D. And minerals, zinc, selenium, manganese. These are very important, and chromium. The other thing is looking at your liver, whether you have something called glutathione. It's very important in the detox process. If you have low glutathione levels, you probably are not going to break down the estrogen as well, or a fatty liver. We got to address that. Then the other thing that you will start looking at is what is the exposure to chemicals? Are there other things that you can do that are more natural? So we're going to have to look at your chemical exposure on a regular basis. Can you minimize those? Can you use more natural products? Ultimately, it really comes down to the same 5 pillars of health, right? You got to look at your gut health, look at your nutrition, look at your fitness level, look at your hormones, and look at your stressors. And through all of this, for it to actually work well, you'd really need a team, whether it be you working with your yoga teacher, your fitness trainer, a nutritionist, or your functional medical doctor, whomever you decide is going to guide you through this. You need to work in a 100% partnership and really get to the other side where you can minimize the symptoms so you can come off hormone supplementation. Try natural hormones, obviously, and make sure you take your supplements. And then as you come off, as you can slowly come off it, you'll find that your symptoms are not as bad. The only other thing I would say also, a low testosterone also works very much against us. So women tend to have higher estrogen and progesterone. The reason men are protected for autoimmune disorders and a lot of the infections, and we tend to get all of this, is somehow the testosterone protects them. So we have to make sure our testosterone is not low but optimal for our age. And closer to menopause, the testosterone is a little higher too. But if it's very low, that needs to be addressed. And I think the supplement for that I was looking up is ginseng. I can tell you exactly what ginseng, Panax ginseng can have benefits for androgen insufficiency. So there are a lot of these supplements. You want to work with someone who understands herbal medications if that's what you want to choose, or a functional medical doctor who understands supplementation. And then getting supplements, you've got to do the supplements for at least 6 months to a year as you work on your gut health and on your stressors and on your nutrition status.
And so that's the thing, though, too. If you're just doing the supplements, you have to still work on your stressors internally and externally, too, because supplements will only go a little bit, maybe. But, if you have a crappy gut, you can't really even absorb it anyways. So
that's why we always have, invest a little time on your health, guys. Otherwise, when you start doing supplements a few times and then say, oh, give up, it didn't work for me, that's not how you do it. The body is a system, and you have to address it as a system. You have to understand. You have to, first of all, have a desire to feel better. Number two, you have to dedicate a little time for yourself on a regular basis. And number three, you got to work with a mentor who can actually guide you through this process. Otherwise, of course, you can read a lot of this material, but how many, with the internet age, I don't think anybody needs a doctor for that matter, because there's so much of information out there. It's just so overwhelming and confusing. So work with someone who can break it down, take you step by step, and get you to where you need to be. I think that's really what is missing, and a lot of people feel overwhelmed. I see Pam is on. Do you have a question, Pam, or is this covering what you had asked about menopausal symptoms? But like I said, it begins in your adolescent, early 30s. For you to have a great menopause, you really need to make sure you take care of your health even before your first baby is born. If not, at least soon after the babies are born. But don't get to the point where you're like 50, 55 and then expect to feel like a 20-year-old just because you have decided you're going to take care of your health. It takes a little time. So to answer the question, is menopause a pathological condition, or is this a physiological condition. It should be a physiological condition, but should not be so symptomatic that you're miserable. If you're miserable, it's because there's been a lot of imbalances and that they have developed over the years. And as you make those changes, make it consistent and long-term, and you'll find at the end of a year, you're not having these 5-year-long menopausal symptoms. I hope that helps. Thanks, Pam. I'm glad it answered a lot of your questions. So, when we want to wrap up this, we always talk about your food as medicine tip. And what do we have today?
I got a couple more points that I wanted to make.
Oh, sure.
First of all, kind of going back to all of it starts when you're young.
Yeah.
So the main thing is don't ignore symptoms. I know, maybe now you're 50 or you're 60. Those are all symptoms that are not normal. So get that addressed. And if you know anybody who's younger and they're starting to have, any kind of, endometriosis like way early now.
Yeah.
So
it's not really
insulin resistance, all that stuff. Like that's a big deal.
And I really it's got to do with a lot of the foods. And to answer your question about prebiotics are basically fiber. So you could have those things, walnuts, oatmeal, corn, dark chocolate. I'm a little wary of corn because almost 96% of the corn is genetically modified. However, eating just fruits and vegetables will give you enough prebiotics. I know there are companies that actually sell prebiotics. If you're one of those that cannot get in your vegetables, a few options are there. I like Juice Plus. Not that I like Juice Plus because I do think their ingredients sometimes, I think the capsules are fine because they just dehydrated vegetables. Gives you the prebiotics if you cannot eat vegetables, but otherwise I would say, and I would encourage you to pick the 2 or 3 vegetables that you like. Make sure you include them with most of your meals. That's a cheaper way of getting prebiotics rather than buying pre-prepared prebiotics, but those are always available for those days that you feel like, I can't put some time to cook today, and, those things can happen. So yes, prebiotics are important because that's affecting your gut. It changes the microbiome, and the microbiome is very important for your vitamin production, vitamin absorption, and your immune system. And if your immune system is not intact, you're at a higher risk for autoimmunity and therefore a lot of disruption. So absolutely, that's a very good question.
On top of taking just, like inulin, big prebiotic kind of fad, honestly, right now. If you're eating vegetables, you're also getting so many more nutrients that way. Plus, obviously, I'll have the prebiotics, just what your good bacteria eat. But constipation is a huge issue. So you can't just take a prebiotic and get rid of constipation, but you can eat a bunch of vegetables, and most people can alleviate constipation. Because if you're constipated, your intestines are reabsorbing all of that crap that your liver just worked so hard to get rid of. So even that estrogen and all those byproducts, it's going to have to go back through that whole process again. It will reabsorb your estrogen stuff that's trying to get out. So
in fact, I think of all the gut issues, being constipated is probably the most detrimental or toxic. If you use the word toxic. It's probably the most toxic. So constipation should never be normal. Gastroenterologists will always say, what can you, there are different types of habits of bowel movements, and those are not true. I hope, Pam, you heard the prebiotics is really the fruits and vegetables are your prebiotics. There are soluble, insoluble, resistant fibers, like you could do the root vegetables, sweet potato, rutabaga, and then you could do celery, the beans, garbanzo beans, kidney beans, black beans. If you don't have too much of bloating sensation from the beans, you could use those. The dry beans soaked and cooked are probably a better source than just the canned beans. Because again, they're canned, even though there's no BPA, there's BSA, there's some different.
There's always some kind of crap in there.
Yeah, to preserve it. And I think it does disrupt our hormones. Women in particular have 600 plus hormones, and every one of them gets disrupted by just one domino card, right? It's just that one effect and everything. And once you get disrupted, getting the hormones to balance is a full-time job. To me, it's almost like looking at a newborn baby. I almost forget to shut my phone off. I'm sorry. But it is like taking care of a newborn, where you are you're having to constantly focus on your health once you have a hormone disruption in an autoimmune state. So keep that in mind. Once you lose your health, focus on it till it's as normal as you can get at your age. Okay, what else?
Sounds good. I guess the other thing too is omega-3s with the vitamin D. If you do have low vitamin D, it can be an imbalance of omega-3 and omega-6. So you want your omega-3 to be higher, omega-6 to be lower, because your body actually can't utilize the vitamin D.
And also, like when you look at the traditional omega-3, omega-6 ratio, it was actually 2:1, and the omega-6 is always a little higher because you want the inflammatory process to be there to protect you. But we are unfortunately at 21:1 now.
Yep.
So we need to get it down at least to 6:1, be very practical and try to bring the omega-6 to 6:1, but we got to get the omega-6s down, and the only way we're able to do that is to bring up the omega-3. That's why we advocate omega-3 a lot, or omega-3 rich products. So walnuts do come under that, and you can actually, and fish, of course, if you can get a good quality fish without much of the same chemicals that disrupt our hormones is present in the fish too, because we dump so much into the ocean. And it's very difficult to get even deep sea fish that is not contaminated. So yes, I think living a healthy life is getting very complicated. The only way to overcome and circumvent that and actually get good health is to focus, make health a priority. Number 2, empower yourself with knowledge. Number 3, get the testing done so that you know where you are. Don't ignore symptoms. Doesn't matter how simple the symptoms may seem. You got to address them. Anything else that we haven't covered about menopause?
I don't know. I'll tell you in 30 years, 40 years.
Well,
I don't know.
Hopefully we've covered everything that people need to know. And before we wrap up, what do you want to talk about in terms of food aspects?
We'll talk about onions today.
Onions.
Why would we talk about onions? So if you guys have been at any of our other group coachings, you probably heard a lot about onions, but onions and garlic are part of the allicin family. So they also are really great detoxifiers because they contain a lot of sulfur. So any vegetable, root vegetable, whatever you want to call it, that has sulfur is going to help your enzymes, your liver enzymes to detoxify. So that comes really important when you're talking about detoxifying estrogen and stuff like that. The other couple little tips with onions. When you're peeling your onion, you take out that outer layer, but don't go any further than that outer layer because that outer edible layer has so many of the anti-inflammatory products in it. About 75% gets taken off with that like little bit of fleshy stuff that you take off the top. 75% is out. And I always I over peel my onion. I never realized I was doing that. So just peel that outer part that you can't eat and then leave the rest. The best thing to do is obviously to chop up onions, eat them raw in a salad or whatever. But if you are going to cook it, the next best thing to do is to actually cook it in a little bit of vegetable broth at a lower heat for about 3 minutes. So sauteing it that way helps to keep those enzymes and nutrients all intact.
Raw is always better.
Yes, you always get better nutrients.
I don't know why nature made it that way. Garlic, onion, all of them eaten raw are the best.
They taste delicious.
They do, but we stink sky high.
We do stink.
Yeah.
What else? Onions actually have huge polyphenol counts, so it's all very good anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer things. They're one of the highest for that.
Did they actually inhibit the aromatase enzyme so that in the fat cells, so you don't produce so much of estrogen?
Oh, it's like you're telling me this.
Okay.
Let's talk about aromatase and then onions.
Yeah, they actually inhibit the aromatase enzyme, so in the fat cells, then when I said they get converted, the estrogen, its production is increased. You can actually take raw onions and cut down your estrogen. So if you're in a hyperestrogen state, that's something that you can do.
So the effects are twofold: to decrease the estrogen that's being produced and to get rid of the estrogen that's already being made, or to break it down. Yeah, pretty cool. Also helps with cholesterol and fat handling in your liver. So it all goes back full circle. That's why you don't address just one thing, but yeah, and it helps with the omega-3 profile as well on an enzymatic level, actually, in your liver. So,
well, I learned that one thing about outer layer because I usually take that out. I'm thinking all the layers of the skin.
I know, and you're peeling up, so it's like slimy kind of, and it just looks gross, but keep it in there. It's where all the good stuff is, of course. Nothing we don't want.
Okay. So hopefully, once again, this was our 4th podcast, and keep writing to us. Let us know what you would like to learn. We're trying to simplify the process so you understand what you can do for yourself. So just to wrap up, take care of insulin resistance, which means eating whole foods. Number 2, if you start accumulating fat, intra-abdominal fat, we want to work on reducing that. Most people have just a little bit, but we're really talking about those real difficult, stubborn fat when you have all of the symptoms. Making sure your nutrients are appropriate, making sure you're not exposed to too many chemicals, and checking your blood tests and actually knowing the levels, and working with someone who can get you to where you need to be, where you feel optimized, your health feels optimized. That's really what we work towards.
Take the guesswork out of it because there's a lot involved.
Absolutely.
If you don't know what you're doing.
So thank you once again for hearing us and hanging out with us. And once again, we are from Holistic and Integrative Center of Novi. For those of you who are new to us, and that's the best place for you to find your best doctor, and that is always you.